Good evening. I'm Mayor Michael Dillon Brennan, and I would like to call the May 7th, 2018 meeting of the University Heights City Council to order. Mrs. Thomas, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Rott?
Here.
Mr. Wiseman?
Here.
Mr. Sims?
Here.
Mr. Pardee?
Here.
Mr. Erdl? Mrs. Cameron? Mrs. Weiss? Here.
Is there a motion to excuse Mrs. Cameron and Mr. Erdl?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mr. Rott?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mr. Sims?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. All who are able, please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First item of business is the approval of the minutes. Is there a motion?
Which set of minutes?
Okay, there are two sets of minutes, I believe, that are unofficial and before the council. We should probably take them one at a time.
April 2nd, perhaps?
Okay, we have a motion to accept the minutes of April 2nd.
But I have amendments.
Oh, with amendments. Okay, the amendments, please.
Thank you. And I believe Mr. Sims had amendments earlier,
Previously.
right?
Yeah.
My only amendment is on page 3 of 11, number 9, where there are comments from the audience. Kyle Francis, 3605 Meadowbrook, is Kyle Coughlin, just to correct the name. Thank you.
Yes, that would be
And then I
correct.
will make the motion to.
Okay. And Mrs. Thomas, do you have Mr. Sims' corrections? Okay, very good.
I
So,
just have to say, with my computer crashing, those minutes I cannot open up yet because they were backup drive. And I see them, but I cannot open them. So I'm
Okay.
gonna-
all right.
Okay.
Well, then, we will note that there may be some delay in getting them posted while we work through that computer issue. So we have a motion to accept the April...
I have a comment,
Oh, we have a
Mayor.
comment, yes.
On page 6, the very last line where it says Mr. Roth commended, that should be commented. Not commend that, but I did comment on it.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Relic. Now, we have a motion to accept the April 2nd minutes as amended with the corrections by Mrs. Pardee, Mr. Sims, and Mr. Rock. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Rock. Is there any discussion? Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mr. Rott?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mr. Sims?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Are there any further motions regarding minutes?
We have the minutes of May 16th, but I have corrections.
Okay. So with regard to the May 16th minutes, what are your corrections? Oh, excuse me, April 16th, I
Did I
believe.
say May?
Well, I said May. I don't know if you said May.
It says May 16th,
Does it say May 16th?
but maybe the minutes are from
Oh.
April 16th.
April 16th, okay.
Thank you.
So,
So that would be a correction.
all right. So the headers need to say April 16th.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Thank you. We're a little ahead of ourselves. On page 2 of 6, under the mayor's reports and communications, anytime GAP is cited, it should be GAAP. And I wanted to correct James G. Gupta, I believe it's Zupka, Z-U-P-K-A, as the audit firm. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Pardee. Are there any other corrections to submit to these minutes? All right, is there a motion to accept these minutes as corrected?
So moved.
Okay, motion by Mrs. Weiss to accept the April 16, 2018 minutes as corrected. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Sims. Is there any discussion? Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll on the motion?
Mr. Rott?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mr. Sims?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Okay, very good. Motion carries. Next up on the agenda is Comments from the audience. Speakers are limited to 5 minutes, total time allowed 15 minutes per meeting. We typically relax those. However, if you could keep your comments to 5 minutes or under, that is always greatly appreciated when possible. Are there any speakers this evening? Anyone who would like to address the city? Okay, Mr. Hubman. For purposes of the recording, if you could please speak into the microphone, stating your name and address first for the record.
My name is Sheila Hubman. My husband and I live on Ashurst Road. And my comment tonight is nothing about the agenda. I want to talk about a very interesting meeting we went to last Tuesday at the University Heights Public Library. And the topic was move to amend. And I'm not here to talk about the topic. I'm here to talk about the meeting. There were 3 presenters, 2 from Cleveland Heights and 1 from University Heights. And they gave the presentation and what it was for and all that. And during that presentation, there were some rather strange things said, but I'm going to jump to the end. I'm sorry, I have trouble. Oh, the University Heights presenter indicated to us that, now first of all, the Cleveland Heights presenters said that in the surrounding suburbs, but I, like you, Mr. Sims, don't care what they do in the surrounding suburbs, but it seems to be really important when it came to that other issue. So the surrounding suburbs all put it on the ballot, and it passed in all the suburbs. And this University Heights presenter indicated that it was going to not be put on the ballot, that it was going to be decided by the council. And I just want the chance to vote on it, because the end of this movement is to amend the federal Constitution. And I think that every University Heights resident should have an opportunity to vote on something that's going to be an amendment to the Constitution. So I'm just asking to be allowed to vote, and that's all. And he also said that it was too costly to put on the ballot. He had been told by somebody employed by the city that it was too costly to be put on the ballot. And we said special election, and he said no, on the ballot. Well, I don't know if that's true or not, but I would be interested in knowing how costly it is. All right, that's why I've come tonight. You can see it's been tough. But then I have a set of questions for all of you. If a person who owns property in University Heights doesn't pay the property taxes, does the city have any recourse? Is anything done, or can we? I know all about putting it in when it sells. I got all that. I mean immediate recourse, and what do we do? And my other question on that is, does anybody know how much the city is owed in outstanding unpaid property taxes? And then my third point is so petty. Why is there an outhouse on the median on Belvoir Boulevard between Silsby and John Carroll? Anybody know?
I'm sorry, where was that located?
It's on Belvoir on the median between Silsby and John Carroll. Big green one. Just sitting there. Anybody know? Okay. Thank you.
I don't. Thank you, Mrs. Hubman. In response to your points, Mr. McConville, I think, can address at least the part about the referendum. Would you care to take the floor, Mr. McConville? Sure.
So I think that the meeting that you attended at the library related to a movement to circulate an initiative petition that would call for council to pass an ordinance that would require the mayor to send letters to certain federal dignitaries, senators, and politicians, asking them to consider the repeal of the Citizens United case by constitutional amendment. That's what I understand the move to amend issue to be. In University Heights, we have a charter provision that requires any residents or citizens who gather the necessary signatures for an initiative to bring that set of signatures to council first, and then council is required to consider the ordinance. If council passes the ordinance, it then becomes law in the city of University Heights. If council rejects the ordinance, which is to say they would reject the initiative of the citizens, then it would go to the ballot. Other municipalities don't have a charter provision that requires that process. So in some other municipalities, you might simply gather your required signatures and that would cause a measure to go directly to the ballot. But because of the way our charter is structured, the matter comes to council first to see if they will simply adopt. And only if they refuse to adopt does it then go to the ballot.
Does anybody know just how very expensive it is to add on to an already existing ballot?
There shouldn't be any additional cost to add a ballot measure to a regularly scheduled election. We're already paying those costs. So the cost of an election does not typically have anything to do with the number of issues or races that are being considered. It's only if there's a special election that's mandated. And I don't recall whether an election has to take place within a certain period of time upon an initiative petition being rejected by council. If that was the case, there could be additional expense if a special election were required, but I don't think that's the case. I think it goes up on the next regularly scheduled election, and so it shouldn't be any more expensive.
Well, clearly, the University Heights presenter was misinformed. He actually quoted some of you people sitting up there, and that is not the information we were given. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if anybody had anything about the other points brought up. I was unaware of the outhouse or portalette located on Silsby. That's something we can certainly, on Belvoir near Silsby. That's something that we can look into. I don't, Mr. McCorney, were you aware of anything regarding that?
I was not.
Okay, well, we will have to look into it. Thank you for bringing that to our attention. Mr. McReynolds, did you know something about that?
Not directly, Mayor, but commencement is scheduled to start shortly, I think a week or so from now. We've had permit requests for tents, so this could be connected with those festivities. That would be my guess. That it's probably temporary in nature. We don't require permits for that type of thing.
I see. Okay. Very good. Thank you, Mr. McReynolds.
This actually raises questions in my mind, and I can wait till the building commissioner's report. I don't want to hijack the meeting at this point, but I'll wait.
Well, thank you, Mr. Wiseman.
I reserve the right to ask a question.
So noted. Would anybody else from the public care to address the city at this juncture? All right, very good. Okay, next item on the agenda, reports and communications from the mayor and the taking of action. There are a few things that I would like to report. First of all, an update on the audit. Interim Finance Director Michael Frederick sought and obtained an extension on the audit. We now have until July 27, 2018 to reconstruct the incomplete books from 2017 and submit them. We are continuing to accept applications for Economic Development Director and Communications and Civic Engagement Coordinator. The selection processes are underway. We have an abundance of qualified applicants for these positions, and knowing how full our City Hall is, some of you may be asking, where will our new city employees be working? In conjunction with that, I am pleased to announce that the city has signed a lease for office space at 2245 Warrensville Center Road in the space previously occupied by State Farm Insurance. The city has signed a 3-year lease with an optional extension. The space is now being remodeled and it should be ready by June. The new 2018 Recreation Guide is out. You should have received it in the mail this last week. We have updated the look and the feel of the guide, and the information is presented in a more readable way. I would like to thank Lisa Marinick, our Special Projects Coordinator, for leading the effort, together with our Recreation Director, Melissa Kanowitz, Pool Manager, Aaron Moore, and Service Director, Jeff Picorni. The pool opens Memorial Day weekend. Speaking of Memorial Day, there are some new and special features for this year's Memorial Day Parade and Ceremony, including a flyover by the United States Air Force at 11:30 a.m. over the intersection of Warrensville and Silsbee during the parade. The Ohio National Guard Army Band will be marching and performing in the parade. The National Guard will also have 2 vehicles in the parade. There will be a decorating station for bikes. The city, along with University Heights Library and Sports Clips, will sponsor a decorating station prior to the parade. Kids of all ages and adults can go to the community park at 9:30 a.m. on Memorial Day and decorate their bikes, strollers, what have you, for the parade. The library staff will assist the kids in decorating and then walk them to the parade lineup area where they can then participate in the parade. Thank you to Sports Clips for donating the decorations. Our keynote speaker at the noon special tribute ceremony will be Army Major Tim Jenkins, Assistant Professor of Military Science at John Carroll University. Major Jenkins was commissioned as a second lieutenant in 2003 to the Chemical Corps. In 2006, he transferred to military intelligence. Major Jenkins deployed to Kuwait and Turkey, where he served as an intelligence planner for the Allied Land Command of NATO. His awards include the Global War on Terrorism Service Medal and the Humanitarian Service Medal. If you are interested in entering the parade, there is still time. Please fill out the form on the city's website and submit that to Lisa Marinick's attention sometime this week. Also coming up is the Heritage Home Program informational session. It's an information session to help with free technical assistance for your home repairs, maintenance, and rehab needs. That will be Thursday, March 17th from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. here at City Hall.
Maybe May?
May?
Because March is past.
Yeah, it would be May. And I wrote May and I said March. It will be May 17th from 6:30 to 8 p.m. at City Hall. The Rain Barrel Workshop will be Wednesday, May 23rd at 6:30 p.m. in the Service Department Garage. The cost is $60 for the Rain Barrel, but it's also free to just come and listen. Registration is open until May 16th. The block party and garage sale application permits and a list of guidelines for both block parties and garage sales are all available on the city's website, universityheights.com. You should look for the residence column at the top of the homepage and click on forms and information. City Council, I know Kelly sent to you a poll asking which of 2 dates would be better for you, or if you were good for either of 2 dates for a joint meeting with the CHUH School Board on either Wednesday, June 27th or Thursday, June 28th. If you could let Kelly know before the end of the evening, if you didn't already respond to the poll, that would be most appreciated so that we can finalize that date and make it official with the school board's calendar. Finally, tomorrow is the primary election. Don't forget to go out and vote. And whether you take the Democratic, Republican, or nonpartisan ballot, please remember that your University Heights elected officials have unanimously supported State Issue 1, the anti-gerrymandering issue, and that we would urge all of you to please vote yes on Issue 1. And that concludes my report. Thank you. Turning to the regular items on the agenda, the first item is a motion to appoint Patty Carlisle, Justin Seabury Gould, and Allison Hibbard to the city's Fair Housing Commission. Ms. Carlisle, Mr. Gould, and Ms. Hibbard are all present here, and if you could stand up and so the council can see who you are. Anyway, I've been delighted to speak with all three of them extensively about the responsibilities of the Reconstituted and Reconvening Board. This is a commission which is supposed to have 3 members that serve on 3-year terms, and they're supposed to be revolving so that there's a new person being appointed or coming off every year. So after discussion with the 3 candidates, what we are looking to do is to have Ms. Hibbard take a full 3-year term, Mr. Gould a 2-year term, and Ms. Carlisle a 1-year term, and that would be retroactive to this past January. My thought then being that January 2019, bearing unforeseeable circumstances I don't really foresee, I would simply ask the council to reappoint Ms. Carlisle then to a full 3-year term. So if anybody has any questions for our 3 nominees for the commission, they're here. You have their resumes, and if there are no questions, we can also accept a motion.
Mayor, I'd like to make the motion to appoint Patty Carlisle, Justin Seabury Gould, and Allison Hibbard to the city's Fair Housing Commission, and also say I am thrilled that you found such a talented panel to represent us. So thank you for being willing to serve.
Second.
And can we include in the motion that we're staggering the terms accordingly?
Yes.
Okay. So Hibbard for the 3-year, Gould for the 2-year, and Carlisle for the 1-year. Okay. So motion by Mrs. Pardee, second by, was it Mr. Wiseman? Okay. Any discussion on this motion? Mr. Wiseman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've 2 of you have come before us. Ms. Hibbard, look forward to speaking with you or meeting you. I just think it's wonderful to have people who are obviously so talented. I've seen your resumes, and who want to be involved in the city, who have the chance to actually be involved in the city. It's nice. It makes our job so much easier in city halls, I'm sure, to have people who are so interested in, who like the city and want it to stay as nice as it is, actually be involved. So I'm glad you all agreed to serve. Thank you very much.
Yes, I wholeheartedly agree. Thank you. All right. Is it Mrs. Cameron?
Yes. Mr. Mayor, if you could give us a brief idea of what their responsibilities will be and what the focus of the commission will be.
Yes, the primary responsibility of the commission will be to hear fair housing complaints as they arise within the city. We have an administrative process for accepting fair housing complaints. To date, we did not have the body appointed to hear any complaints that were filed. We have reason to believe that a complaint or complaints could be forthcoming at some point. This is a city that has an increasingly large number of renters. Certainly it isn't only renters that have fair housing issues and complaints, but certainly whenever you have a market where there are houses changing hands, whether by sale or through leases and renting, there are bound to be occasions to have an issue that ought to be decided on at least an administrative basis or on some sort of basis. And we want to make sure that we afford that opportunity to our residents and citizens, or would-be residents, depending on the situation, and be able to rectify as needed, where needed.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
This-
Yes, Mr. White.
Thank you. It's something I didn't realize this until this prospect first came up, but this is something already called for by our statutory structure. The code calls for a fair housing board and contemplates these kind of complaints to the city. We haven't had this, at least since I've been on council. Maybe some of the more senior members can describe whether it existed while they were here. So I mean, this is not something that this administration created out of whole cloth. The city is set up to do this. You're just making it so we actually have the board and the people to run this. So
And that is correct. And while there have been updates to our fair housing statute in the past, it is not the body, as a matter of process that would hear complaints, has not been constituted. So having that body ready and willing to hear a complaint if one is filed is, I think, an instance of good governance, so that people know that if they need to come to City Hall to bring this kind of problem to us, that we are ready to hear it. Is there any further discussion on the motion? If there's none, Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mr. Sims?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
I think so. Mrs. Thomas, do you have oaths for?
No, I'm not sure how you want them to be phrased, so.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, then we will hold oaths at a future date before you convene for your first meeting. And I want to take this opportunity to thank and congratulate our 3 new members of the Housing Commission, Allison Hibbard, Justin Seabury Gould, and Patty Carlisle. Thank you. Okay, the next item on the agenda is Ordinance 2018-27, amending codified ordinance section 1220.09 entitled Public Meeting and Notice for the purpose of providing Planning Commission members with the right to establish a regularly scheduled monthly Planning Commission meeting at a date and time convenient for Planning Commission members, and this is to be heard on emergency. This particular item is being introduced by myself, Mayor Michael Dillon Brennan, the point of which is this. Last year, it was the desire of council to, and it's a desire that I share, to ensure that Planning Commission meetings are held promptly and efficiently, so that when there is business before the Planning Commission, those meetings are convened in a regular course without delay. What we did as a city previously was we set the 3rd Wednesday of the month as the set day for Planning Commission by ordinance, and as such that date cannot be changed without a change in the ordinance. Now, as it turns out, candidly, when I asked April Urban if she would serve on this committee, she asked what day it met, and I indicated it was the 3rd Wednesday of the month, and she said, well, that's not usually a good day for me because I teach a class. And I said, oh, I'm sure that we can put that on another day, not realizing that we had set that by ordinance. So it isn't simply a matter of the Planning Commission electing a set day of the month. It is a matter of changing the ordinance to do that. Now, rather than setting it as a different day in the ordinance, what I have suggested with consultation of our law director, that we do set a regular monthly date, that the commission set that it not be changed more often than once a year, so that there is still a reliable date that the public and applicants can rely on. As before, if there is nothing before the Planning Commission, like there isn't this month, then the Planning Commission meeting would simply be canceled, but that there would still be a reserved date for that meeting. At the same time, we are also adding language that nothing in this ordinance is to be construed to prohibit the Planning Commission from ever rescheduling a meeting as necessary or conducting a special meeting if necessary. So I hope that council would agree to these changes. I believe that they continue with the spirit of keeping a regular Planning Commission date on our calendar. It just affords the commission some flexibility to set its own schedule.
Mayor,
Yes, Mrs. Purdy.
I sponsored that original legislation, and the purpose behind that was as you indicated, to ensure timely planning commission meetings, because the prior methodology was to schedule a meeting if there was enough business that came before the planning commission, meaning there was always a scramble to try to adjust people's schedules. We believed as a council that a regular date, even if there was no business, again, as you indicated, and the date was canceled, would be preferable. We selected that date to meet with the calendar at the time because of BZA meetings and other meetings, but I think this is a sound fix that does afford flexibility, but does stick with the idea that we had, which was to make sure there was always a planning commission meeting scheduled and that the members knew exactly when it would be so that they could count on it. So I fully approve this, and I'll make the motion to pass it on emergency.
Thank you, Mrs. Pardee. If that's a motion then by Mrs. Pardee, we'll see if there's a second.
I'll second, just knowing that this would be a regular scheduled meeting at some point
Yes.
every month, so that we are all aware when that meeting is. And so applicants can plan accordingly as well. When someone wants to go to a house or put a business here, they know that planning commission is going to meet at this particular day to prepare and then all the information's in. So I'll second, just knowing that this is regular schedule.
Very good. So second by John Rock. And just for the record, I agree fully with the comments of both Mrs. Pardee and Mr. Rock. And again, support wholeheartedly the idea of regular planning commission meetings being set so that when there is business before the city, that it be dealt with promptly. Is there anything further? If there's no further discussion, Mrs. Thomas, will you take the roll first on the emergency, the suspension of the rules?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mr. Sims?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Okay. That passes. So then on the main motion. Would you call the roll again, please, on the main motion?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mr. Sims?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Okay, very good. The motion carries and is in effect upon signature. Next item on the agenda is item E, Ordinance 2018-26, authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract wage agreement. We're at C? Oh, you're right, we are at C. Excuse me. Okay, the next item is item C, Ordinance 2018-28, amending codified ordinance section 1280.10 entitled Rental of One and Two Family Dwelling Units in U1 and U2 districts for the purpose of amending the duration of rental permits, modifying the rental permit fee schedule, and updating appeal procedures. This is on first reading. Mr. McConville, well, Mr. Wiseman, you're the sponsor of this legislation. We'll go to you first.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This actually came out of the building committee, although it was really a product of the committee of the whole. We all discussed this. We all sort of came to these ideas. So, but basically, we're changing Chapter 1280.10 of the code to make a couple changes. The first change surrounds the case, I believe, where there is a double house and somebody living. There's the owners living in the house along with a close relative at another end of the house. I believe the idea is that we don't force that person to come up with a rental permit. Let's say I have a double and my parents are living with me. I'm not really renting it. They're just staying there. So the first bit of language under 1280.10 E1 encompasses that change.
Can I comment on that?
I'm sorry.
Can I comment on that?
Please.
I would just add, it's a little bit broader than that, in that it applies as an exception to the obligation to obtain a rental registration permit to any rental property in the city, whether it's a double or a single, as long as it meets the requirements of the exception, which are that it be owned by a family member and that that it be owned and lived in by someone who's related to the owner, and we define that relationship, that family relationship, by code.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Law Director, and that was an either or, so either the owner lives in it or somebody else by blood relation lives in it. Right, so that's not a distinction that I made, but thank you. The other part of it is that the city is in effect doubling the cost of the rental permit and shortening the time frame that the permit is applicable from 2 years to 1 year. So specifically 1280, I'm sorry, I'm reading this on the fly. 1280.10C, 1280.10E, or F, sorry. This is why you shouldn't have an iPad when you try to read a large piece of legislation. Basically, a rental permit is now going to be $600 a year for a single-family dwelling, $800 a year for a double, $600 for half of a double, is that correct? Correct, okay. And then $200 for a qualifiable third floor. Thank you. I hope nobody's more confused now than they were before I started talking. That wasn't my intention.
I think again, to summarize, the existing fees are being doubled. And the time frame is being shortened in half. So that whereas now you would have to obtain a rental registration permit every 2 years, under this ordinance, the requirement will be an annual requirement.
Okay. Mr. Wiseman, did you have anything further?
No, I was just going to say that's I should have let him talk from the very beginning.
That's advice I could use sometimes too.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wiseman. Mr. Rock,
Yes,
do you have
thank you,
something?
Mayor. I
Okay.
support this legislation. We talked about this at length at the meeting. One thing we discussed was the cost and where we came up with that number. At first, I thought it was a little steep, but when we discussed why we needed to make it this amount, we talked about the annual inspections that are required for these housing units. So right now, a rental would be inspected every 2 years, and for the health, safety, and welfare of the residents who reside in those rental units, we feel it's best that they're examined. Like other cities, every single year there's a cost with that. So that is why we had to increase these prices. Again, it's a safety thing as well. We want to make sure that the tenants have, sound units that they're living in.
Thank you, Mr. Rock. Does anyone have anything further? All right, well then, this will have been considered the first reading of this proposed ordinance, and it will return for a second reading and vote on our next regular council agenda. Okay, at this time, I would entertain a motion to move items D and E down on the agenda. These are items regarding wage agreements, labor agreements with our service union and our fire union. We did want to go into an executive session with our labor counsel, Jeremy Iosu, who I don't believe is due to arrive until around 8 o'clock this evening, and we are further along now than we necessarily expected to be. And that's great, except for the fact that Mr. Iosu is not here. So we do have other business regarding the service department and various contracts, and we can certainly discuss those items now. So if there is a motion to take the agenda out of order.
So moved.
Thank you. All right, and is there any discussion? If there is none, Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mr. Sims?
Aye.
Mrs. Purdy?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mrs. White?
Aye.
Very good. We are now on item F, motion to authorize purchase of 1 5-ton dump truck cab and chassis from Cleveland Freightliner, Inc. through the ODOT Cooperative Purchase Program not to exceed $85,571, and 1 stainless steel 5-ton dump truck with a plow and snow ice control system from Concord Road Equipment through the State of Ohio Cooperative Purchasing Program not to exceed $69,745.60. Mr. Picorni, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. The total of that is $155,316 for the 5-ton dump truck with salt and snow control equipment. This truck is a replacement to what we call the Lyndhurst truck. It's a large red colored dump truck, and you might recall only about a month ago we reported to you that that truck broke due to rusting of the dump body bed and the dislocation of the lift that lifts that bed. So that truck is currently out of service. This truck will take approximately 6 to 7 months to have built and turned over to us. So I'm respectfully requesting that council authorize the purchase of the truck through Freightliner and Concord Road Equipment.
Very good, thank you, Mr. Picorni. Are there any questions for Mr. Picorni?
Yes.
Mr. Sims?
So this is a single vehicle, and it'll be equipped differently depending on what time of year it is? Is that what's going on here?
That is correct. It is actually a dump truck, which is capable of carrying 5 tons of material. So in the summertime, we use it for road jobs, excavating road repairs, putting that in the truck. We also use it for collecting dirt and things like on the tree contracts.
Right. And I did see that total number somewhere today, but could you just tell me what the total cost of the truck will be again?
$155,316.60.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Are there any further questions for Mr. Picorni? If there are none, is there a motion?
Mayor, I would move that we authorize the purchase of this 5-ton dump truck, cab and chassis from the Cleveland Freightliners through ODOT Cooperative Purchase Program, and the stainless steel 5-ton dump body with plow and snow / ice control system from Concord Road Equipment through the State of Ohio Cooperative Purchase Program for a total not to exceed $155,316.60.
Very good. We have a motion by Mr. Sims. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Weiss. Is there any discussion on this motion? If there is no discussion, Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll on the motion.
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mr. Sims?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Okay, very good. Motion carries. Next item, item G, motion to authorize the extension of the contract for recycling services with Kimball Transfer and Recycling. Mr. Picorni, you have the floor.
Thank you. In 2015, the City of University Heights contracted with Kimball for the processing of recyclables. That's our blue bag recycling. Through Cuyahoga County Solid Waste District, who did the bidding for this with a group called the East Side Consortium. So there's 12 communities that participate in this. The contract was a 3-year contract with an option for 2 additional years, option year 1 and option year 2. We've completed the 3 years. We're looking at option year 1. The Cuyahoga County Solid Waste District has polled the members of the East Side Consortium, and all have agreed that the best option is to continue with the current contract under option 1 for 1 more year. And then we will go once again to the bidding process and review our options beyond that. We currently get a minimum of 5 cents per ton up to $1.39 per ton, depending on market rates. And in 2017, we received $3,500 for our blue bag recycling. I am recommending that we continue with the consortium through option year 1 and requesting council's authorization to do so. With authorization, we simply will be sending a letter to Kimball indicating that we're continuing with option year number 1.
Okay, very good. Are there any questions for Mr. Picorni? All right. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion by Mrs. Cameron to authorize the extension of the contract for recycling services with Kimball Transfer and Recycling. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Sims. Is there any discussion? Very good. Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mr. Sims?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Next item is item I, motion to authorize the purchase of a leaf vacuum trailer, $26,594.23, and 2 leaf boxes. Did I miss one? Yeah, I am on H, you're right. Thank you. Yes. Next item is item H, excuse me, motion to authorize the extension of the solid waste disposal service contract with BFI of Ohio. Mr. Picorni.
Thank you, Mayor. Again, in 2015, through the Cuyahoga County Solid Waste District, we bid the disposal and transfer of solid waste. That would be our garbage that we collect in the garbage trucks that's dumped at BFI, a transfer station, where it's then packed into semis, where it's transferred to a landfill. I provided you the contract year 1, 2, and 3 rates here from $37 to $39. It's gone up. Option year number 1 is the same as we had for our last item, recycling. There were 2 additional years in the bid process, and option year number 1 raises from $39.49 to $40.68. Again, the consortium through the Cuyahoga County Solid Waste District polled all of the members, and each have determined that this would be a fair and equitable rate for an additional year. We currently spend approximately $120,000 to $130,000 a year on solid waste disposal in this contract. And I'm requesting that we continue with option year number 1. Same result, we will not change the contract, but we will send a letter to BFI indicating that we are proceeding with an additional year.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Picorni. Are there any questions for Mr. Picorni? Very good. Is there a motion?
So moved.
There's a motion by Mrs. Pardee to authorize the extension of the solid waste disposal service contract with BFI of Ohio, the optional additional year. Is there a second?
Second.
A second by Mrs. Cameron. Is there any discussion on this motion? Okay. Seeing none, Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mr. Sims?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Motion carries. And now item I, motion to authorize the purchase of a leaf vacuum trailer, $26,594.23, and 2 leaf boxes, $12,011.15 from Old Dominion Brush Company, not to exceed $38,605.38. Mr. Picorni, you have the floor.
Thank you. This is to continue our curbside leaf collection program with the vacuum machines. The oldest of these machines, the tube which goes from the vacuum unit itself through an impeller, through this tube into the box on the top of the dump truck. That tube has rotted to beyond repair. We've had to patch it together, welding it. We've replaced it once already. This unit is beyond its useful life, so I'm recommending that we purchase a new unit in its place. This was a 1993 unit, so I think we've gotten quite a few years out of it. The boxes were purchased around the same time as that machine, so they are both beyond their useful life also. The hinges have gone, we've re-welded those on, we can no longer do that again. So this is to purchase 1 vacuum unit and 2 of the boxes that go on the back of the dump truck that the leaf units blow into. And I'm recommending this purchase through NJPA contract, which is similar to another consortium for bidding public contracts. National Joint Powers Association.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Picorni. Are there any questions for Mr. Picorni on this item?
National Joint, what?
Powers,
Powers
right.
Association.
Correct. If you look at the second page under the leaf unit, gives you a diagram of the unit, the cost breakdown.
Right. I just wanted to include it in the motion.
Okay.
Alliance. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Wiseman.
Thank you. Mr. Courtney, these are new items or used items?
These are, we're purchasing all new.
Okay.
No, not used items.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Wiseman. Is there a motion?
Yes, I would move to authorize the purchase of a leaf vacuum trailer and 2 leaf boxes. How does National Joint Powers fit into this? Because we're purchasing it from Old Dominion. Brush Company.
Through the National Joint Powers, I'm
Through-
sorry, it wasn't association, it was alliance.
Okay, from Old Dominion Brush Company through the National Joint Power Alliance in an amount not to exceed $38,605.38.
We have a motion by Mr. Sims. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Cameron. Is there any discussion on this motion? Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mr. Sims?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Motion carries. Next item. It's item item J, the motion to authorize seeking bids for a Kubota rubbish scooter. Mr. Picorni, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This is an annual purchase of one of the little orange Kubota rubbish scooters that we drive up and down the driveways collecting garbage with. We have a fleet of 6 of these. Currently, one of them is down with a transmission that cannot be repaired. They do have a 6-year life, so we purchase one every year in a 6-year cycle. This has been on the agenda or on the in the budget since the beginning of the year. It's just time that we have to go out and bid it. Previously, we've received these from Middlefield Farm and Garden in the range of $15,000 from ABC Equipment Rental, also in that same range, and Botnick's is another vendor. So we will be seeking bids from those 3 vendors for this piece of equipment.
Very good. Any questions for Mr. Picorni on this item? If there are no questions, is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, motion by Mr. Wiseman, second by Mr. Sims to authorize seeking bids for the Kubota rubbish scooter. Is there any discussion on this motion? Seeing none, Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mr. Sims?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Motion carries. Next item is item K, motion to authorize the purchase of a trailer air compressor with tools through NJPA from APO Pumps and Compressors LLC, not to exceed $17,087. Mr. Picorni, you have the floor.
Thank you. This piece of equipment is a air compressor with jackhammer tools and bits for breaking pavement and repairing pavement areas around manholes and catch basins, that type of thing. The unit that we currently have was manufactured in 1980. We've pretty much gotten everything we can get out of that unit. It's time to replace it, and I'm recommending that we go through the National Joint Powers Alliance for that purchase through APO Pumps, $17,087.
Okay, we have, thank you, Mr. Picorni. Are there any questions for Mr. Picorni about the air compressor?
Not really, but I just want to make sure that we establish something. We've basically authorized a number of capital improvements today, and I just want to confirm for the record that they, 1, are included in the budget, and 2, that they were reviewed and discussed at the Service and Utilities meeting.
That is affirmative, yes, they all were.
Thank you.
Yes. Is there any further discussion? Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Sims to authorize the purchase of a trailer air compressor with tools from NJPA from APO Pumps and Compressors and LLC not to exceed $17,000.87 with a second by Mr. Rock. Any discussion on this motion?
Mayor, I think you got your money mixed up.
Do I?
$17,087.
Yes.
Okay.
Did I misstate it? $17,087 then, for the record. Thank you. Is there any discussion? Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mr. Sims?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is item L, Resolution 2018-29, to participate in the 2018-19 winter contract for road salt with ODOT. This is on emergency. Mr. Picorni, will you please take the floor and address the council?
Yes, Mayor. This is for the purchase of road salt for the upcoming winter, 18-19, which will start sometime in November, hopefully, or maybe later, and go through this period of 2019 to March of 2019. This is a contract that we've participated in the past through ODOT, and they have asked us to make a commitment in legislation as to how much salt we will be purchasing for that winter. I am recommending that we request 2,500 tons of salt under this contract. We use approximately that amount, if not more each year. Actually, we're closer to 3,000 and something. So this is with the 1,500 tons of salt we recently legislated purchase of for the summer fill. This will top out that number at the end of next winter. So we will use all of this salt through the next winter season.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Picorni. Are there any questions for Mr. Picorni on this matter?
Of course there is. I'm glad you talked about the summer field because I was getting confused, but like I asked before, is there not a price associated with this, a cost?
There is not a cost until they actually bid it. And that bidding will occur sometime in the next 2 months. Usually we get the answer around June, sometime in June.
So if the price is excessive, and I don't know that it will be, but let's say it is excessive, do we have a way of saying that we're not interested at that point?
Yes, we do. I believe the contract gives you a 30-day out. So.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sims. Any further questions for Mr. Picorni? All right, is there a motion to accept Resolution 2018-29?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, and then this would be on emergency. So, same? Okay, so motion by Mr. Sims and a second by Mr. Wiseman. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, very well. Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll first on the suspension of the rules?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mr. Sims?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Okay, very good. And then on the main motion?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mr. Sims?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Okay, very good. Item M, motion to accept bids and authorize the mayor to enter into contract for 2018 Groveland and Washington Waterline Replacement Project. Mr. Cheney was unable to be with us this evening, but I understand Mr. Picorni is prepared to address the city on this matter.
Yes, I am, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Last Friday, May 3rd, we opened bids for water line replacements on Groveland from Milton to Green Road and on Washington Boulevard from Staunton to South Taylor Road. There were 5 bids received. They ranged from $1,294,434 to $1,813,481. The engineer's estimate for this project was $1,335,000 and some additional change. We will be replacing 6-inch water mains with 8-inch water mains on this project. The project is fully funded through the City of Cleveland Water Department. So authorization to award these bids will be fully funded back from Cleveland Water with the amount authorized. We're requesting authorization to award to Noche Enterprises, who has done several water main projects in the city in the past. Most recently, they had the project on Church Hill, and I can't remember the other street they did that year. But their bid is considered the lowest and best bid at $1,294,434.90. And we're recommending authorization of the bid contract to Noche Enterprises.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Picorni. Are there any questions or discussion? Mr. Wiseman.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Item number 2, Washington Boulevard from Staunton to South Taylor. There's not much of that is ours, is that correct? Or do we own all the way to where?
The water main hydrants and appendices to the water system are feeding both sides of the street in both communities. And it's actually owned and maintained by Cleveland Water, which is why they're paying for it.
But just so I can remember correctly, we own Washington. Is Washington Boulevard ours, or do we own half of Washington Boulevard along that stretch?
As you come up from Cedar Road, we own all of Washington Boulevard to Staunton. And as you come up from Staunton past Raymont, we own all of that. As you curve and the road straightens out, it then becomes Cleveland Heights on the north side and University Heights on the south side, all the way to the end, which is Wynn, of the pavement. But the right-of-way goes all the way through to South Taylor.
So a good bit of that is actually University Heights
Yes.
items or interstate property. Got it. Okay. For some reason I was thinking, there's that one street Nordway where we own just like a couple of feet, but this is
We own
almost looks like 50-50 as you've described it.
probably a little more for University Heights.
Okay, wonderful. And the best part about it is that the water department is going to pay for this.
That is the best part.
Yes, excellent. Thank you, Mr. McCormick. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Wiseman. Any further questions? Is there a motion?
Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to authorize awarding the bid for the water main project for Groveland Road, Milton to Green Road, and Washington Boulevard, Staunton to South Taylor, awarded to Noche, not to exceed $1,294,434.90.
Second.
Okay, very good. Motion by Mrs. Pardee and a second by Mr. Sims. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Mrs. Thomas, will you please call the roll on the motion?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mr. Sims?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Very good. Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Picorni.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I would also be remiss if I didn't take a moment to thank Mr. Sims and the Service and Utilities Committee for their strong work with regard to the various agenda items touching their committee that we dealt with this evening. Thank you, Mr. Sims. So we will go back on our agenda items D and E. D is Ordinance 2018-25, authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract wage agreement between the City of University Heights and the International Association of Firefighters Local 974, setting forth the rate of compensation and benefits and conditions of employment for members of the bargaining unit. This is on emergency. We also have the item E, Ordinance 2018-26, authorizing the mayor to enter into an agreement with the laborers Local 860, setting forth the rate of compensation and benefits for members of the bargaining unit on emergency. I would note that the city's labor counsel, Jeremy Iosu, has entered the chambers, and I would also note that it would be appropriate to have a motion to go into executive session at this juncture so that Mr. Iosu can brief the council on labor matters pertaining to these items. And if there is a motion, we'll hear it.
Mayor, I make a motion to go into executive session.
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Rock to go into executive session. Is there a second?
Let's just make sure for the purposes of the record that it's to discuss the labor contracts.
For the purposes of discussing the labor contract.
Yes. So there's a motion by John Rock to go into executive session for the purpose of discussing the labor contract. Is there a second?
Second.
Labor contracts, excuse me. Is there a second? And the second is by Mrs. Pardee. Any discussion? Okay.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
Even though we vote to go into executive session, could we go through the director's reports and the committee reports and then finish this agenda so that in deference to those who may not want to stay through the executive session, we could finish the meeting?
Yeah, if there's no objection, I don't see why we couldn't do that.
Yeah, I would just, Mr. Sims was nudging me, but he, just so it's clear to the audience members that if we do that, when we come back into open session after the executive session, there will be action taken on these two agenda items. So there could be additional discussion, and there's likely to be motions and voting on each of the proposed ordinances. So the public, of course, is welcome to stay and then reconvene along with council.
It's just that the public, of course, has to leave chambers during the executive session.
So Mayor, I'm in favor of the suggestion that was made by the Vice Mayor.
Okay, very good. If there's no objection, then we could table or simply, we have to take the motion off. Well, we're not going to move
No,
there.
we don't. So let's just, for purposes of the record, and indicate that we're again moving items D and E to the end of the agenda, and let's do that by motion. Is there a motion?
Certainly, yes. We could vote on the motion now and then convene the executive session
To the
after.
end of the agenda items.
So moved.
Well,
Second.
okay. Well, I think we had a motion, but
We have a motion for executive session that we should vote on.
Oh,
Yes.
that's right.
yes. John's motion was on the floor already. Okay, so
that
we will
seconded?
take Mr. Yes.
I second.
Yes, Mrs. Pardee seconded Mr. Rock's motion. So we will vote on, Mr. Rock, you'll agree that the executive session is to have occur following the directors and committee reports. Okay, very good. Well, then we will take the roll on Mr. Rock's motion. Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll.
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mr. Sims?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mrs. Wise?
Aye.
Okay, very good. The motion carries. So we will enter executive session upon the conclusion of the directors and committee reports. So we'll turn now to the directors' reports. First is Director of Finance. Mr. Frederick is ill and not with us this evening, and I have delivered probably the single most significant item that he would add at this juncture, which is that we do have, and I will repeat from earlier, an extension on the audit. So we may submit our materials by July 27 of this year for calendar year 2017. Director of Law, do you have any report?
I do, Mayor. First, just very briefly, I want to give council the latest update on the Epic Lifestyle litigation that relates to 3886 Silsby. There was a hearing conducted in that case. Unfortunately, the receiver did not produce the kind of information that the court was looking for to establish all of his various costs and expenses that would allow the court to grant his motion to place the receiver's lien on the property. And so the hearing was continued, and there will be another hearing that is set to take place on May 23rd, at which time hopefully the principal matters in the case will be resolved and the receiver's lien will be placed on the property. So that's the update on the Epic Lifestyle litigation. I do want to report on the issue of small cell technology. As you might remember, University Heights is a participating community in litigation pending in Summit County that relates to Senate Bill 331, which was a state law that would allow small cell technology providers to locate their technology anywhere within the public right-of-way without the need of obtaining municipal approval. Along with about another 150 municipalities across the state, we joined in litigation pending in a variety of courts to have that law declared unconstitutional on a couple of different grounds, but most prominently a violation of the single subject rule, because the way that the state Senate passed the legislation, they included a variety of topics that were unrelated to each other. For example, small cell technology on the one hand and pet store regulation on the other, just to name one example. In the meantime, the Ohio legislature has been at work in conjunction with both the small cell lobby and the Ohio Municipal League and the attorneys in the various court cases to craft new legislation that would replace Senate Bill 331, and that legislation passed earlier this month. It will go into effect in the middle of July, and it has some fairly significant differences from the original legislation, and I'll just walk through those now for you. The new law will allow a municipality to adopt and apply reasonable written design guidelines, will increase the amount of time to review an application for installation of a new pole in the right-of-way from 90 days to 120 days, will provide that a municipality can determine the application fee up to $250 and an annual rental fee up to $200, and can adjust those fees for inflation. Limits the number of applications that can be considered together to 30, lowers the maximum permitted height of new poles from 50 feet to 40 feet, and allows a restriction as low as 35 feet when there are other height restrictions in the area, and requires that small cell companies timely act when a permit is issued. I believe they have 180 days to make their installation once a permit is issued, and they are required to indemnify the city in connection with any injury or other event that could occur that relates to installation or existence of the small cell technology. It's been suggested that municipalities adopt new regulations that include design regulations, and I'm in the process of obtaining a quote from Walter Haverfield, who has already developed the legislation, to see if they might be able to provide that to us affordably, and then provide that to council as an option. But the small cell regulations are, these are likely not to be challenged, so this will likely be the law going forward. And I believe the thought is, with our litigation that's pending, we had the one case where the court, the Common Pleas Court, disagreed with our position, and so the thought is just to let the appeal ride and see whether the Court of Appeals will rule on it, because we would love for them to overturn the existing decision of the Common Pleas Court for purposes of strengthening that one subject rule that we may need to lean on again in the future. It's possible that the Court of Appeals will decide the issue is moot because of the new legislation, but there's no downside for us to just kind of wait and see whether they'll go ahead and rule on the pending appeal.
All right, very good. Thank you, Mr. McConville. Are there any questions? You covered a lot of ground. All right.
My only question is on the indemnification. How will that be done?
That'll be done by ordinance. We'll want to implement that provision, and I suppose we could enter into developers agreements, but I think it'll be sufficient to include it as a matter of law.
Very good, thank you. Next is public safety. We'll start with fire. Interim Chief Perka.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. I just want to provide you the incident numbers for the month of April. In April, the fire department responded to 149 incidents, 87 of those in EMS nature, 62 in fire, 7 of those being structure fires. We provided assistance to our neighbors 18 times during the month, and they also helped us out 14 times. Your fire department is also currently flushing hydrants. It's been taking place for about 2 weeks, and I think we anticipate to be done by next week. So if you get any phone calls about rusty water, you can refer them to us, or just let them know to run the cold water until it's clear, and to wait to wash their clothes until after we're done working in that area. The fire department is also having seniors from high schools doing internship programs this month. We have a student a week participating during business hours, riding on calls and providing us with some help and showing them what we do from a day-to-day basis, watching us train and do maintenance on the vehicles. And so you may see them riding around with us for the month of May. Last month we had a safety committee meeting, and one of the items that we talked about starting was a residential lockbox program. I wanted to have a model of a couple of the samples that we could provide, so I have those tonight that I can leave for you guys to look at. This would be the standard version, which hangs over the top of a door. And if it was unable to hang on the door, or they didn't want it to hang in plain view on the door, there could be a mounted version that mounts into the door jamb. These keys would be keyed to one common key that the fire department owns and is secured in our Knox box, which is the key that we use for all the commercial properties in the city. So I'll leave these with you. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Did you want to? Okay. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, very good.
Thank you for bringing the samples.
Okay, Interim Chief Rogers for the Police Department.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. First, I'd like to apologize. I was not able to get the police blotter out to Council today. We had a pretty significant workload over the weekend. We had to complete a lot of follow-up today to make sure that our police blotter and public record was thorough and accurate, and we were still working on it through most of the day today. So tomorrow we should have the police blotter complete, and I'll provide the same at that time. I'd like to acknowledge that we have a retirement pending in our department. Lieutenant James Holden has formally acknowledged that he is retiring in July 20th of this year. He has 37 years in law enforcement, 31 of those years being at University Heights Police Department. So we have acknowledged, and we will also have more information in the future related to any type of ceremony to acknowledge his service, but it has been formalized at this time that we will have a retirement July 20th for Lieutenant Holden. Pertaining to the related succession training and reassignment, I've been assessing specific job descriptions within our agency throughout the past week. I've started the process of formalizing what is going to be the Office of Community Policing, which is a topic that I've discussed with the Safety Committee at the last meeting. So we've been working on, again, formalizing this office, putting personnel in place, and we hope to have it up and running within the next week or two to start our formal approach to engagement with the community at the administrative level, as well as the patrol level as well. We'll have input and a position in the new office. So we've been working on that. I've also been attempting to obtain quotes for new police vehicles related to capital improvements. I'll have more information this week, and I'll forward those to the Safety Committee as well to review. And again, we're expecting that within the next day or two relating to specific quotes, and as soon as I get more information, I'll provide that accordingly to start the process.
Chief, to clarify and for the benefit of council, we're going to want to order those vehicles by when? In order to get them ordered for this year?
I discovered approximately a week and a half ago that there was pending POs to fill capital improvement related to vehicle purchasing, going back even into 2017, where there was 3 approved, 2 in 18, and we have not purchased any since 2016. So there's a cutoff date at the end of this month, I just recently found out, that would require an actually approved purchase order to obtain vehicles on the current government contracts, which expire later in the year. So their cutoff date is towards the end of this month for a purchase order. And I know this is short notice, and I apologize for the circumstances, but as soon as I found this information out, I started discussing with the mayor, and I'm trying to get quotes, provide the safety committee to start the process as soon as possible. So there is a little bit of a time constraint, and when I get more information, I'll make sure that the safety committee and council and the mayor is aware of.
Thank you, Chief.
So Chief, may I ask then, does that mean we should expect to see an ordinance on emergency at the next council meeting?
If things continue to progress as I expect them to, that would be the case. Again, after getting the quotes and discussing these capital improvements with the safety committee.
Good.
As well as the mayor.
Okay, thank you.
Related to succession planning, I have been working on scheduling with Ms. Thomas an entrance test as well as a promotional test for sergeant. Again, this is just something that with the retirement, once we're notified of retirement pending, we start the process to backfill the position. So I've been working on that as well with Ms. Thomas. May 2nd, we had a line striping project kickoff meeting with representatives of Shaker Heights. This would be the 3rd year of a 3-year contract for citywide line striping. And they start with Shaker Heights. We weren't given a specific time frame of when this would start in our city because they're going to finish Shaker Heights first and then provide us with more information related to a time frame of when they'd be in our city actually working. Again, just to acknowledge that type of work is typically done between 8 p.m. and 5 a.m. And it's very dependent on weather. So from last year's work that was done, there was some complaints related to accuracy and consistency of the line striping of what was currently there. We've taken measures in the meantime since the last meeting to ensure that not only everything that is going to be that's there currently that will be restriped, but issues that we've had since last year that were not striped will be addressed this year in this year's contract. And we've also formalized a plan that will allow for weekly communication with the contractor, who is ARL, to ensure that there's a sense of quality control on a weekly basis and the needs of the community are met pertaining to line striping. And that completes my report.
Okay. Thank you, Chief. Mr. Wiseman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is for the chief and for the administration. Did I hear you correctly, Chief, that we ordered 2 police cars in 2017, but they were never purchased by the previous administration?
Mm-hmm.
No, there were, in 2017, it appears that there was approved capital improvements of 3 police vehicles. For a multitude of reasons, which I will get into with the information I provided the Safety Committee, they were not purchased in 2017. In 2018, we're also approved through capital improvements for an additional 2 vehicles.
So 3 vehicles in 17, and then there are 2 put on the budget for 18.
Correct.
And did we vote on these in 2017 to purchase these new vehicles? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if we voted on them, but they were in the budget.
In 17, the vehicles were never presented to council. We never were able to, again, for a multitude of reasons that I'll get into with more information, we did not even present the specific vehicles or purchase orders to council. It was never presented. They were, however, approved in the budget from what I've been able to locate, 3 vehicles for capital improvements from 16 into 17.
Mm-hmm.
And throughout 17, we were not able to purchase vehicles.
Do you know Do you know why?
There was some issues with cutoff dates, government contracts, workloads. Again, it was multiple factors.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Wiseman, and thank you, Chief. Was there anything further for Chief Rogers? Yeah, I mean, suffice it to state, Chief Rogers wasn't the chief a year ago. I wasn't the mayor a year ago.
Sure.
I do understand that there were budget items and plans that were not fulfilled, and what we're looking at would be 3 police vehicles to be ordered hopefully before the deadline at the end of the month this year.
That'd be correct.
Yes.
Even though there was 3 for 17 and 2 for 18 that were approved for capital improvements, in my personal perspective, I think 3 would be an adequate number versus 5 just because it was approved.
Right.
So
Right.
that's the direction we're going at this time.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Next, we have Public Service. Mr. Picorni.
Thank you, Mayor. I would just like to report that our spring cleanup of curbside vacuum leaf collection and loose brush has been completed. So from now on, everybody will need to put leaves in lawn bags, craft paper bags, and out on garbage day for recycling. Brush needs to be tied and bundled in bundles no more than 50 pounds. So that is how we'll continue collecting brush and leaves through the summer. The tree pruning contract 2017, pruning and removal contract will be completed probably by the end of this week. And then we will be moving on to probably fall planting, starting to look at locations where we're going to plant trees this coming fall. Purvis Park, the pool has been filled. The opening day will be Memorial Day, Monday the 28th. The bathrooms there are now open and available to the public, as are the bathrooms in the community park. They are also now open and available. And that's my report.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mrs. Purdy.
In your earlier discussion about the rain barrel workshop, you talked about needing to register. Everybody needs to register even if you aren't purchasing a rain barrel?
I believe last time we had open spots available, but they'd like to know what size crowd, how many tables to set up, and how many chairs we have. So they do ask that you register.
And you can go ahead and register and then decide to purchase a rain barrel at the
Yes.
end of the, okay.
Yes, you can. They're actually available through the county year-round if you wanted to contact the Cuyahoga County Soils and Water Conservation District.
Great, thank you.
Yes. Just as a shortcut, if you go on our website to our last At Your Service newsletter, there is a link there that will take you to the link to buy the barrel and register for the program. And you can also buy a second barrel for just $20 if you're inclined to buy 2. I only bought 1.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anything further for Mr. Picorni? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Picorni. Next is the Building Commissioner, Mr. McReynolds.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, members of council.
Good evening.
The building department was approached by the Oliveri Company on behalf of Swenson's to issue their complete certificate of occupancy. The item remaining was the landscaping, which had to be put off for the winter months. So, building department performed an intense and detailed inspection of the approved plan for the landscaping. They found that 1 tree was not planted. This is near the Beechwood side, away from the Cedar Road area. So they are going to have to plant that tree to be in complete compliance, and then we'll be prepared to issue the certificate of occupancy. The next Board of Zoning Appeals meeting will be this Wednesday morning at 8 a.m. There's one case involving a person who wants to widen their driveway. Several other cases coming up for renewal. You're all invited if you'd like to attend. This is the time of year where we begin our grass watch. We already have a landscaper in play that is ready, and we've started actually looking for grass that's 6 inches or taller. If you know of anybody whose grass hasn't been cut, or a vacant home perhaps, let us know. We'll be happy to go out there, give them a notice, and then start cutting it if that's the case. At a previous building committee meeting, I was asked to do some research into the sidewalk programs at Shaker Heights and at Lakewood. I can talk to you about those findings now, or we can present them at the building committee meeting, whichever you prefer. Mr. Rice?
If you were to present them now, how long would that take?
Committee meeting.
A few minutes.
Mr. Wiseman, would you prefer to have this at your committee meeting?
We can wait for the committee meeting.
All right, we could do that then.
Not that we do not appreciate your efforts, Mr. McReynolds. Thank you very much.
At least we can give you a good overview of how these programs have worked. Each one has been in place for a while. And I've also discovered, with the help of Kelly, that in 2014, we entertained the idea of opening up bids for a sidewalk program. To my knowledge, that was never followed up, but we did have the bid form prepared. However, yes, we're at the discovery stage right now. This would be too late this year to enact it even if we wanted to, but this is a good time for discussion if you wanted to plan for something next year or the year after.
Wonderful. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any questions? Yes.
Mrs. Hubbard mentioned that there was a porta-john on the median in Belmar between Silsbee and, I think, between John Carroll, maybe, between East Carroll.
Yes.
And I think you said that we don't monitor that, or we don't have a...
We don't necessarily require permits for it. My idea was that it was there for the commencement ceremonies because they have asked for permits for tents, because tents are flammable and could potentially trap people inside during a conflagration. We do require permits on that, and we look for safety devices. This is a type of thing that's kind of unusual. If it is in the median there, certainly ask them to move it to a less visible location, but that was my gut feeling.
Right.
That's why it was put
But
there.
if it's there, you don't know really who put it up, right? But we don't have a permit for that. I could just throw one of those up in my yard and, right, on the tree lawn. And it
I'd have to
wouldn't,
make I'd have to look at that, but I don't know of anything specifically that mentions those type of facilities.
Wow.
Maybe that's something we'll look at in the building committee meeting.
Sure. You know, when we have a construction project going on, we normally address the location perhaps of the trailer.
Right.
And where services are going to be for that trailer. And normally it doesn't even come up with discussion as to where the porta potties are located, rather, are there enough?
Right.
Yes. So, but yeah, certainly we can discuss that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Wiseman. And if anything further, Mr. McReynolds?
No, that's
Okay.
all from my report.
All right, well, thank you Mrs. Cameron?
Yes, I had a question as to when exterior inspections were going to begin.
Immediately. We were waiting for the weather to break, and so we've started our exterior inspections.
Oh, that's too bad. What side of town?
It's going to be south and west section of town.
Thanks.
We promise to be fair and gentle.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. McReynolds. And before you go, I want to thank you for staying on the, making sure that the plan is followed at Swenson's with regard to all the landscaping in deference to our friends and neighbors in Beechwood.
Very welcome, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. McReynolds. All right, next is community development. Mr. Grogan Myers has finals today, so I have his report. There will be a Silsbee Road Neighborhood Park meeting tomorrow, Tuesday, May 8th, 2018 at 6 p.m. at the site of the future park, 3578 Silsbee Road. That's 3578 Silsbee Road. Those who cannot attend can view the progress updates online and email feedback to development@universityheights.com. The city will be mailing out a letter to homes with delinquent property taxes in the next 2 weeks to encourage them to enroll in a payment plan with the county treasurer's office or simply to pay off the delinquent balance. Homeowners who do not enroll in a payment plan or pay off the balance may have a tax lien certificate sold on their property or face tax foreclosure. Current efforts through personal phone calls and a first round of letters sent to the rental property owners has resulted in payments of roughly $84,000 and one homeowner enrolling in a payment plan. If you have any questions or want more details of this report, please let Mr. Grogan Myers know. Thank you.
You said 84?
$84,000 so far.
84,000?
$84,000. Yes.
It works.
Yes. Ask and you shall receive.
Right.
And the park meeting is tomorrow night
Thank you, at 6 p.m.
at 6 p.m.
Thank you.
Okay, that takes us to the standing committees of council. First up is Building Chairman Mark Wiseman.
No report, Mayor.
Very good. Civic Information Chairman Pamela Cameron.
No report, Mayor.
Thank you, Pam. Next is Finance Chairman Susan D. Pardee. Mrs. Pardee.
Thank you, Mayor. There is going to be a meeting of the Finance Committee of Council on May 31st at 7 p.m. We have several items on the agenda besides an update on finance office operations and the audit. There's legislation that we will be looking at that needs to be passed in June before we recess, if we elect to make that recommendation to council. We'll also talk about the kinds of reports we want to see since we have a new interim director. So any other agenda items, please feel free to forward to me. Thank you. But everyone is free on the Finance Committee on the 31st, so it's our meeting here in council chambers.
Very good. Thank you, Mrs. Pardee.
Thank you.
Governmental Affairs Chairman Michelle Weiss. Mrs. Weiss.
Oops, thank you, Mayor. We will be having a meeting on May 24th at 7 p.m. to continue our discussion on the tax abatement ordinance and tricycle vendors.
Oh.
The tricycle vendors. Yes.
Yeah, here.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Weiss. Recreation Chairman Philip Ertl. Mr. Ertl's not here. Does anybody have a report from the Recreation Committee?
No report.
No report. Safety Chairman John Rock. Mr. Rock.
Yes, Mayor. We did meet last week. Well, first, actually, I want to thank Ms. Thomas for changing out my microphone. I think it's on. It does work. So for 4 months, you had to deal with my feedback, and I've had it on this entire time. And it sounds great. So
You do sound great, Mr. Rock.
Thank you. Look forward to watching the tape later. So we did meet a few weeks ago, the Safety Committee meeting. I want to thank Chief Perko and Chief Rogers for bringing lots of ideas to the committee to discuss. We and the police discussed the idea of neighborhood policing initiatives, what that could look like. Lots of different ideas in that regard. We also discussed Neighborhood Watch. On the fire side, we discussed many programs, including CPR training and car seat checks and smoke detectors and the Lockbox program, which was just circulated around just today. So we would like to have another meeting. I know there's a standing meeting on the second Monday of the month, and for purposes of discussing the vehicle that Chief Rogers discussed earlier, we as a committee did agree that for major capital improvements, it should go to committee first, just like in the Service and Utilities Committee when we're looking at service vehicles. We'd like to also look at police and fire vehicles and equipment because they're big ticket items and they require a lot of thought and discussion. So I'd like to have that discussed in our meeting. So because of the timeliness issue of it, we'd like to have something as soon as possible. And then Chief Perko would like to move forward with the Lockbox program. We know there's a couple different options. We could discuss that as well. I know there's a form that they're working on for application, and if there's an application fee, what that fee would be set at. So that's something else that we can discuss at the next meeting. So I would like to schedule something soon, hopefully that Monday, if we have our committee members available. I'll have Kelly send around a poll just to reaffirm that.
Thank you, Mr. Rock. All right, Service and Utilities, Chairman Stephen Sims. Councilman Sims.
No report, Mayor.
No report. Committee of the Whole, Sue Party, Mrs. Party, do you have anything for us?
No report.
No report. All right, very good. Well, then that takes us back to the point of the meeting where we would enter into the executive session. For those of you in the public who are interested in staying, please feel free to go downstairs and make yourself comfortable there, and then we will open the doors and call everyone back in after we have conferred with Labor Council for any votes we might take on the contracts. I would ask our videographer if he would stay and not tear down as we often do before executive session, because I do anticipate votes that should be recorded on video. Okay, very good. All right, is there a motion?
I'd like to move to exit executive session and go back into regular session.
Okay. Motion to exit executive session and return to regular session. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Second by, we'll say Mrs. Weiss. Motion by Mr. Wiseman. Do we need a vote for that? I think we do. Okay. Will you call the roll, Mrs. Thomas?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mr. Sims? Oh,
Yeah, Mr. Sims has
Mrs. Parker?
left.
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron? Aye. Mrs. Weiss?
Okay, motion carries and we're back into regular session. Next item on the agenda is item D, Ordinance 2018-25, authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract wage agreement between the City of University Heights and the International Association of Firefighters Local 974, setting forth the rate of compensation, benefits, and conditions of employment for members of the bargaining unit. This is on emergency. Mr. McConville, you had some changes for the ordinance?
Yes, prior to voting on the ordinance, council will need to amend Ordinance 2018-25 by motion as follows. The title of the ordinance needs to read as follows: an ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract wage agreement between the City of University Heights and the International Association of Firefighters Local 974, setting forth the rate of compensation and benefits and conditions of employment for members of the bargaining unit and declaring an emergency. Section 1 of the ordinance will need to read as follows. The City of University Heights, Ohio shall enter into an agreement with the International Association of Firefighters Local 974 for a 3-year period commencing July 1, 2017, in accordance with the terms attached hereto and made a part hereof. Section 2, the phrase on the second last line of Section 2, wage reopener, will need to be stricken, and that will need to be replaced with collective bargaining agreements, so that the section will read in its entirety as follows: the City of University Heights and the International Association of Firefighters Local 974 have engaged in negotiations and have reached a tentative agreement setting forth the terms of the collective bargaining agreement, a copy of which is attached and made a part hereof. Section 4, as it exists, of the ordinance will be stricken in its entirety. Section 5 will be the new Section 4 and will read, this ordinance shall apply only to persons who are members of the bargaining unit as identified in the agreement. Section 6 will be renumbered Section 5, and Section 7 will be renumbered Section 6. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, motion by Mr. Wiseman, second by Mr. Rock to the amendments as read by the law director.
About emergency?
This is just to amend.
Yeah.
This is just to amend.
Yes. Is there any discussion on the motion to amend? Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll on the amendments?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Weisman?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron? Aye. Mrs. Weiss? Aye.
Okay, the amendments pass.
Ms. Thomas, I have those for you, so that, and then the next thing for consideration would be
The motion itself.
The motion
Or the
itself.
ordinance itself, now as amended. Is there a motion?
Yes, I'd like to move that we pass ordinance number 2018-25 as read by the law director, that we pass that on emergency.
Motion to pass as amended on emergency is by Mr. Wiseman. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, second by Mr. Rock. Is there any discussion? Well, before we vote, I would just like to say, I'd like to thank Jeremy Iosu, our Labor Council, for effectively representing the city in this matter. And I'd like to thank all representatives of the fire union for their cooperation in reaching what I believe is a mutually beneficial and agreeable agreement. So, if there's nothing further, Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll? First, yes, first on the suspension of the rules.
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Weisman?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss? Aye.
Okay, and then on the main motion.
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Weisman?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss? Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Next is letter E, Ordinance 2018-26, authorizing the mayor to enter into an agreement with the laborers local 860, setting forth the rate of compensation and benefits for members of the bargaining unit on emergency. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Okay,
on
there's a
emergency.
On emergency.
okay, motion to pass the ordinance on emergency by Mrs. Cameron.
Yes, before we move on that,
Okay.
are there any issues with regard to the writing?
Oh, the language of the ordinance? I believe that one was,
It's okay.
I believe that's fine.
All right, well,
Mr. McConnell?
Correct.
Okay, yes,
Then
yes.
let us
Then
know.
no amendments necessary. Okay, so we have a motion by Mrs. Cameron to accept this on emergency. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Weiss. Any discussion? Seeing none, we will vote on the suspension of the rules. Mrs. Thomas?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Weisman?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
aye.
Mrs. Weiss? Aye.
And then on the main motion?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Weisman?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss? Aye.
Okay, very good. This one carries as well. If there is no other business, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, motion to adjourn by Mrs. Pardee, second by Mr. Wiseman. Before we vote, before we go, please let Mrs. Thomas know which of the two dates, or hopefully both dates, you can do for the meeting at the, what days were those? June,
The Wednesday and Thursday.
yeah, Wednesday, June 27th, or Thursday, June 28th. If you could let Mrs. Thomas know before you leave. I know some of you have already responded to the doodle poll, but thank you. All right, Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Weisman?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss? Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, everybody.